Welcome to this video. We will now take a look if a potential user is already registered. So if a user is registered and we go ahead and search in our passenger list for it and it exists, then we automatically want to log in the user, and if not, we want to go ahead and show him a prompt. So what we do for this is we first of all create inside of our register passenger component, where we here register, right? We have that method here. We will create a new method called check passenger. And what that's doing, set it of type void. We'll take a look at that. We will write the code for that just in a second. But for now, we switch to our register passenger component HTML. So switch to the same component, but the HTML template, and now scroll down to the check passenger input that you have right here. And for me, it's in line 5, right? And we will take an event here, and the event is called blur, and blur is taking place, or the event is getting fired once you select the input field and then deselect it, right? So once you move away from the input field after you have entered some values, this is when the blur event is getting called. And for sure, we will now call the check passenger method that we have just created in the TypeScript component. So this one here will get called once the user has entered some email information. I guess you know that, right? It's sort of like you enter an email address and then you switch to the password field, and the email field is complaining about, hey, a user is already registered with that account, for example, right? You know that from other websites, I guess. So since we made changes to our RESTful API, we now go ahead and run our update again, so that our client-side code is updating, so that we can use our passenger service right here to find the specific flight, because yesterday we have created the specific endpoint for this. Now let's go ahead and do that. Right click on the client app folder, open in terminal, and let's run npx ng-open api-gen. Now let's wait a second. You can see that he wrote models.ts, models passenger RM, and passenger service. So now it's updated. And when you take a look at services, passenger service on the right side, you can see passenger RM right here. And you can find the implementation of our endpoint, which is find passenger right here. Now let me close that. Inside of our check passenger void that we have right here, we should now first of all take the email from the form. So let's set it to const params equals to new object email, the value this.form.get email, check if it's null, and if it's not, take the value. So we take the param, in this case we're just taking one, potentially we could for sure take more, and take from the form the email value. Now let's call the find method, so this passenger service dot find passenger. We can simply pass in an email address. You can see that here, params, right? So we can set in the values, so we can pass in the object. And now let's subscribe to it, dot subscribe, and we want to run a method, and inside that method we want to simply console.log passenger exists, and then we can go ahead and extend it logging in now. All right, that's great. So let's save it like this. We can test it now, or we can go even further and directly log in the user. So this .auth service.login user, and here again you can see we need an interface, or we need an object with the interface user implemented. Let's go ahead, create a new object, set the email to again this.form.get email, and then make a null check, take the value. Great, so it's exactly like we have it here, login user, right? So both of them are logging in the user by getting the email from the form. Okay, so now let me explain you what it does. Once you have registered, right? So we start the application and I register account like Yannick at test.com. So the first time I do that, it will register and post it into our list in REST API, so ASP, right? Now we have the information about who registered in that RESTful API, and the next time I would come to that page for registration, and I write down my email address like yannick@test.com, and then I click away from that input field to, for example, select my first name or write down my first name. The check passenger method here would get called because of the blur function that actually gets sent from the input, and then this code would start. He would go ahead and try to find the passenger with the email that I've just entered, and if we found one, he would go ahead and log me in instantly. So I save some time, do not registrate, do not have to register again. He simply sees, okay, yannick@test.com, I got that user already, I will now log him in. Okay, that's fine. Now let's start our application. Great, so here we are again at register passenger. I filled out the form, check the email address, yannick@test.com. Now let me log in. Now here we are at register passenger page again, and I filled out the form, check the email address, yannick@test.com. When I click on login, you can see log in the user with email address Yannick. Now let's just take a look. When we come to the page again, and I now write down the email address, yannick@test.com, right? And now I click away, the blur event will fire then. You can see that. There you go. Passenger exists, log in the user with email address yannick@test.com. So this worked, right? The moment the blur event fired, so once we clicked away, you can see I can definitely reproduce that. And then the find method will find the email address from the RESTful API call, right? And then we have the information here loaded. Great. So in the next video, we will go back to our code and just make some small improvements just to increase the maintainability.